Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Edie Westergaard. I am the program manager at NAMI East Side. I'm super excited to welcome you to tonight's Evergreen Health Forum, sponsored by Evergreen Health. We do these educational forums every month to educate about different topics about mental health and related to mental health. So tonight, I'm super excited to welcome Andrew Kantor. He's a partner at Kantor Kantor LLP and a leading advocate in the field of disability benefits. He has extensive experience helping individuals secure the benefits they deserve, and Andrew brings both deep legal knowledge and genuine compassion to his work. We're so excited to have him here today to share his insights on navigating the disability benefits process. So let's before you start, Andrew, I do have one hand from Ralph real quick. What's up, Ralph?
I just wanted to thank you for allowing me to join, and I'm part of the um, Hero House Bellevue Clubhouse that NAMI Eastside started many years ago. We are celebrating our 20th year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ralph. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm so happy to hear that you're here from Hero House. So thank you so much. Awesome. All right, Andrew, take it away.
Hi, everyone. As Edie said, my name is Andrew Kantor. Thanks for having me. Edie thanked me for taking my time and for coming here. But what she doesn't seem to appreciate is the nicest thing you can do for a lawyer is give them an hour to talk uninterrupted. So I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate you're all going to be here listening to me. The presentation is about mental health and mental health benefits, and specifically disability benefits, what your rights are to those benefits, how you can obtain them, and what some of the most common problems are when trying to obtain these benefits. Um, so first, I want to tell you a little bit about me and what I do. I give talks to different groups for different topics, all related to disability insurance and different things. So I tailor this to who I'm talking to. Um, as you know, my law firm is Kantor and Kantor. My last name is Andrew Kantor. I'm neither of the Kantors. Actually, it's both of my parents. I'm, I guess, what you would call a nepo baby, because I'm taking over the firm from both of them. In fact, I'm because both of my parents are running the firm. I'm two nepo babies or nepo twins, maybe a large nepo toddler even. But I say that not because I want to brag about my lineage, but more how I came to be doing this. My father, many years ago, started pursuing earthquake insurance claims after the Northridge earthquake. Billions of dollars of damage was caused, and what ended up happening was lots of claims were denied, and he spent a lot of years fighting those claims. My mom ended up joining him to help with insurance claims. She ended up getting into eating disorder residential treatment denials. So she spent many years fighting insurance companies who denied care coverage for residential treatment claims for young girls with eating disorders, mostly young girls, often sometimes young boys with eating disorders. And that's what I grew up watching is the two of them, arguing over the dinner table, talking about their cases. My two brothers saw this and ran for the hills and never came anywhere close to becoming attorneys, while I joined them very excitedly because I wanted to do the kind of work that they do. Um, One of the reasons I really appreciate being here is because this group I can empathize with in a way I can't necessarily empathize with some other groups I talk to, say a group with chronic fatigue syndrome or lupus. I've never had chronic fatigue syndrome or lupus, so I can be empathetic. I can see what they're going through, but I've never walked in their shoes. That's not the case with this group. I can say that all the things I'll be talking about to some degree I have been through myself, both as a younger child and as a young adult. And I am fully aware of the fact that I'm here today because of the fact that I had access to treatment, access to support. And I take a lot of pride in being able to give back however I can and helping people who are facing these issues hopefully get the benefits they deserve and at least know what they're doing as they go through this process. So, specifically about what I do as far as the law, my specialty is suing insurance companies, private insurance companies, Unum, Hartford, Blue Cross Blue Shield, all of the private insurance companies. My specialty is not Social Security, disability, or workers' comp, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. But as my mother always used to say, I'm not an SSDI or employment lawyer, but I like to play one on TV. Meaning, basically, we have enough overlap with those areas of law and and can guide enough with those areas of law as they overlap with disability that I feel comfortable sharing information about those things to the extent I feel confident doing it and to the extent it overlaps with disability insurance. But as I'll describe a few times as we go on, if there's, I will give you my email address at the end of this presentation. If there's anything I don't address, questions I don't end up getting to before the end of the presentation, you are more than welcome to email me. As long as you're willing to give me a few days to get back to you, I'm always happy to receive email questions. Okay, so disability benefits from a 30,000 foot perspective, they all define disability a little bit differently, but the general definition is the inability to work full time despite reasonable accommodations, meaning if you can be accommodated, you usually don't qualify for disability benefits. There's a few main sources of disability benefits when you're talking about the inability to work and trying to get income replacement benefits. The most common and most well-known is Social Security disability, which is also known as SSDI. Most people who have worked for at least a few years are eligible for SSDI, and it is paid for via payroll taxes through your work. Private short-term and long-term disability are those things I was describing, the private insurance companies, the coverage you get from them. Most people, if you have this coverage, you have it through your employer. It's a benefit they offer, just like health insurance, just like life insurance, just like the 401k. They'll offer you disability insurance, and it's just one that you pay premiums for every few weeks out of your paycheck. Workers' compensation is a little bit different because with the first two sources, it matters less what disables you. With workers' compensation, you could be entitled to benefits if your workplace or something that happens to you at work either causes your mental health related disability or significantly contributes to it. This can happen in a few ways. Depending on what your job is, you can experience a traumatic event where all health issues where you never did before. That's a no-brainer question as to whether you're entitled to workers' comp. If you have ongoing issues and maybe you have a hostile work environment, I know better than anyone that can cause issues as well as anything. It's sometimes a little harder to establish that your work is the reason that you're suffering from mental health issues. So I'll just discuss a little bit of those details as well. A fourth source, which is unique to a few states like Washington and California, is state disability insurance. You're entitled to, again, similarly as to Social Security, if you work for a certain amount of time, you pay taxes into the system, and if you become unable to work, you could be entitled to benefits through the state of Washington. Last time I checked, there's a website you can go online, and same thing with Social Security. You can just start your application online if you need to do so. We can talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so Social Security disability insurance. I'll talk about this one first because it's the most common. The first eligibility criteria is that you have to expect to be out for a decent amount of time, usually a year. You don't have to actually be out for a year before you file, but the expectation has to be that you expect to be out for a longer term. As I said before, the job you worked at has to be covered by SSDI taxes. There are some jobs that do not pay into the Social Security disability system. Usually those are jobs that provide some other source of disability replacement, like a disability retirement, often government employers. So if you're not sure, you can ask your 95 of employer paying Social Security. The big downside of Social Security disability is that you have to show that you are unable to work in any significant capacity, which means the inability to earn $1,620 per month doing anything. Depending on what you did for a living beforehand and how much you can work, someone who's an attorney out to 4 or 5 hours a month, I may not qualify for Social Security disability. Someone who's, hourly wage only earns them $20 an hour, they can only do 5 hours a month, they would likely qualify. So it really depends on the other jobs you can potentially do, whether you can do other jobs, whether you can do part-time work, and of course, whether you can prove all of these things. One of the benefits you can get from Social Security, currently it changes every year. Right now, the maximum you get is $4,018 per month, depending on how much you earned, plus an extra 50% of that on top, $2,009, if you have any children under the age of 18. Technically, they can be under age of 19, any tax dependents. So you could get up to $6,027 per month. which to some people could be more than enough to replace their income. For other people, it could be really insufficient. It could be not even close, especially if you have other debts or lived at a higher standard before, which a lot of people, especially with inflation, are trying to do at this point. So with Social Security, the way you get the claim started is you do an online application. You go online, you basically give your basic information, and basically just start the process, and then they'll send you information about what you have to do next, including authorized medical records, as well as discussions with your doctor, or as well as potentially discussions with your doctor. Another step with Social Security is they may do an in-person review, or they'll do a medical review and potentially do an evaluation, which means sending you to an actual doctor to have you assessed, either physically or mentally, and they'll issue a report and see what they think. One of the biggest downside of Social Security disability is it is not easy to get approved. It is extremely difficult to get your claim approved. Almost everyone gets denied at the initial stage. So last time I checked, something it was like something like over 80% of people get denied Social Security disability when they initially file the claim, and a large portion of people get denied after that at the appeal stage. It is just an extremely the standard for disability that you have to meet is extremely high. It's harder than any of the other sources of disability. One of the big kind of caveats or issues there is that the younger you are, the harder it is to get approved. The closer you are to your Social Security retirement age, on the other hand, the easier it is to get approved. So people in their 30s and 40s who are really struggling and are, really starting to get into their careers, often cannot rely on Social Security disability. You may get approved, but the statistical chances of someone who's 30 getting approved for the same claim as someone who's 55 or 60, there's a massive gap. So it's much more important for people who are further away from the Social Security retirement age to have something other than SSDI to fall back on if you're having at all, basically. So the other main source of disability benefits, which I specialize in, other than Social Security, is short-term and long-term disability insurance. It's provided by an employer, usually provided by an employer. You can also get it from an individual broker, the same way you can buy life insurance or car insurance or anything else. It's often a lot more expensive if you buy it from a broker, but it's usually more reliable, and I'll explain why that is in a little bit. A lot of people do not know whether or not they have short-term or long-term disability insurance. I actually didn't know if I had it because I didn't know how to look when I first started working at my own firm specializing in disability insurance disputes. I had to actually ask HR how to verify it. And then I had to figure out how they were doing the premiums to make sure it was taxed properly. So even if my employer, who is a law firm, my own parents' law firm, who specializes in disability insurance, wasn't sure how to properly set up the policy, your employer might not be either. And frankly, there's a lot of issues, a lot of questions about how employers set these things up. The best thing to do is just ask them. They'll give you an answer in writing, and they have to do it within 30 days. One of the big things to think about if you are someone who has a history of mental health issues, and you're concerned about them being disabling and you're potentially looking for a new job, pre-existing condition limitations no longer exist in health insurance. They still exist in disability insurance. So what this means is that if you go to a new job and file a claim under that coverage within usually a year, they get to go back and see if you had the disabling condition 3 months before you started working. So for people who are trying to get a new job and they're about to get this coverage, it may be really important to know when you're filing the claim, because that may be the difference between it getting approved or not approved. So short-term disability and long-term disability. Short-term usually lasts 6 months. Sometimes it lasts 3 months, sometimes 12, but most commonly it's 6 months. And long-term disability usually starts as soon as short-term disability ends, and usually lasts until Social Security retirement age, which is between age 65 and 67. Both of short-term and long-term usually give you 60 to 70% of your salary, subject to a monthly maximum. What you get from these sources will be reduced by what you get from other sources of income, such as Social Security and state disability insurance. So if you get $10,000 a month from long-term disability and $5,000 a month from Social Security, you will start to receive $5,000 a month from long-term disability. There's no situation where they add up so you get more than you were originally working. Um, One of the big differences between short-term and long-term disability and Social Security is definition of disability. With short-term and long-term disability, usually you qualify for disability for the first 2 years if you are unable to do your own job. This is very different than having to prove in Social Security that you're unable to do any job. So again, using a lawyer as an example, if I have some kind of cognitive issue or I could do some kind of manual labor job, but I can't be a lawyer, I would qualify for short-term or long-term disability, but I wouldn't qualify for Social Security disability. So anybody, professionals and anybody who is worried about being unable to do their own job, even if they could potentially do something else, it's really important to have one of these own occupation policies. What usually happens after 2 years, if you have one of these policies, is that the definition changes to what's called an any occupation definition, where the definition becomes a lot closer to Social Security. You basically have to show that you're no longer able to do any job. It doesn't mean literally any job. There's usually some constraints put on what the insurance company is allowed to say qualifies as an alternate occupation. They usually have to find you a job which earns you as much as you're making in disability benefits, which is usually 60% of your income. So if someone's making $1 million a year and you're at the any occupation stage, the insurance company usually can't say, well, we say you could be, a button sorter in a factory making $10 an hour. Thus, you don't qualify for disability. This person would definitely qualify for disability. Um, so I kind of buried the lead, unfortunately. One of the big problems with long-term and short-term disability is something called a mental health limitation. This is an unfortunate problem with most of these policies, not all, is that most of them will only pay you benefits for 2 years if you are disabled from a mental health related illness. The specific definition of how they define mental illness varies by policy. Some of them are very broad enough to even include things like mild neurocognitive disorder in what they define as mental health issues. Some are more narrow, where it excludes bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, for example, from the definition and considers those things physical. So if you are someone who has long-term disability and you're thinking about potentially filing a claim or knowing what your options are, the most important thing you can do is get a copy of your policy and look at it and just look at the provision and see what it says. If you have any questions about interpreting it, I'm more than happy to answer those questions. That's, kind of back of my hand stuff at these days, so I spent so much time reviewing these provisions. The unfortunate reality is that there's not a lot you can do to get around those provisions if the insurance company is right about what is actually impairing you. Now, there are many situations where someone is impaired from mental health issues and physical issues, and they're genuinely impaired from both. And of course, the insurance company is going to say you're impaired from the mental health issues. They only have to pay you for 2 years, while you'd claim you're more disabled from the physical issues, so you continue to get your benefits. That's something we argue about all the time. But we often get questions from people who clearly have the issues where the insurance company says they have those issues, and they ask if the provision is legal. They ask if the provision is, against public policy. And the reality is we hate these provisions more than anyone can possibly hate these provisions. They're wildly unfair. They're oppressive, but they're legal. The insurance commissioner of each state approves these policies. So anything that goes in is assumed to be legal and enforceable. The only thing that we get to argue is that it's misinterpreted, but the reality is these provisions do exist, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. The one small piece of information I like to share is that it's a really easy way to tell the difference between an employer who cares about their employees and doesn't, because it takes money and effort by your employer to remove a mental health limitation from a policy. They have to pay more money for it. They have to identify it and ask the insurer to remove it, which most employers do not care about. Why would they spend all that money doing that? I've seen a few law firms and accounting firms and consulting firms making sure they're doing that for their people, because they know that giving someone 2 years of coverage based on a mental health issue is insufficient, especially when there's a possibility that a mental health issue could create a situation where maybe you can't work full-time, but you can work part-time or work in a different occupation permanently. Maybe you can never go back to your full-time job at the same stress level as you could before, and only getting benefits for 2 years for something that may impact you for the rest of your working life is just fundamentally unfair. So I talked a little bit about the any occupation transition before. Basically, the unfortunate thing, another unfortunate thing is that at the 2 year mark, two things happen. The mental health limitation kicks in and the any occupation transition kicks in. So insurance companies love kicking people off at the 2 year mark for one of those reasons. So even if you're approved initially, the big question is whether they're going to approve you after 2 years, assuming you still need the benefits after 2 years. So the claim process for long-term disability is pretty straightforward. What you'll do is, if you're ready to file a claim for short or long-term disability, you tell the insurance company, they'll send you the paperwork you need to fill out. And what you need to do is fill out an individual statement, which explains why you're disabled from your perspective, and also support from your mental health professionals, a therapist, a psychiatrist, both, a general practitioner if they're the one prescribing medication, but you'll need support from a doctor in order to support your claim. They will also need to see your medical records. Now, this is a really interesting question that comes up a lot. In this case, when your issues are only physical, they ask for traditional medical records, and there's no dispute about that. When your disabilities are mental health related, there's a lot of concern about sharing therapy notes and to some degree psychiatry notes. And people do not want their personal therapy notes shared with an insurance company. And that's a perfectly reasonable request. So what I normally tell people to do, and what therapists will usually refuse to give their notes and instead will offer to write a summary letter. And that's something we support and recommend. Just ask your therapist to write a summary letter, which basically explains when they've treated you, what you've discussed, the relevant things to the disability, and of course, a conclusion as to why they think you're disabled and how long they think you'll be disabled for. Do not feel that you need to be bullied into giving the therapy notes. Most therapists won't even part with them anyway. But often insurance companies will just put out a blanket request for everything, and they don't make it seem like you can push back, but you definitely can push back. It's not so clear with psychiatry records because usually they do need the detailed psychiatry records to know why you're getting medications and to know that you're still getting them. And there's less of an argument you can make that there's personal information in there because it's arguably more about medication management. So be prepared to share your psychiatry records. And if there's anything in your psychiatry records you are worried about sharing, I would talk to your psychiatrist about it, see if they can alter the records in a way that isn't dishonest, basically either remove a statement or change it. Many psychiatrists will remove things from records because they don't, if it's contrary to your interest to have something documented in a certain way and it'll still allow them to treat you, they won't necessarily be opposed to that. So it's something you can ask. After they get the records from your medical professionals, one thing they may do is have you examined. They'll either examine your records or ask to have you examined in person. 99% of the time, they don't bother examining you in person. It's my theory that they don't want to do that because they'll have to pay more claims, and it's much easier for them to just deny you based on the paper records. And in fact, we often use that argument against them because we've developed some pretty good case law out there, basically saying you can't deny someone with mental health issues without having a doctor see them in person because you're not even allowed to assess someone's mental health issues without seeing them in person. Like there's restrictions, at least we've argued, of making formal assessments contrary to other assessments without seeing someone in person. So they kind of start themselves from behind the eight ball in that regard in a lot of ways. So if you are someone who is considering or you're realizing you cannot continue to work, there's a few pieces of advice I have. One is that if it's possible, try the accommodation process first, because it preempts the argument from an insurance company that if you had just asked for accommodations, you could have received them and then you could have worked. I am much more confident giving this recommendation to other groups because for most people who are suffering from physical issues, there's rarely a negative. There's rarely a downside to trying the accommodation process. It doesn't make their condition worse. It rarely impacts their disability negatively. So I say this openly and without hesitation. I understand that if you have a mental health related disability, you may not be able to try the accommodation process. You may need to get out of that job immediately. You may know that there's nothing they can accommodate. You may be even in an environment where if you try to accommodate yourself, you'll get worse, or put yourself at more risk. So, when I make these recommendations, everything you do, your health should come first, your well-being should come first. Um, and frankly, if you have to be in that position, you just argue that, hey, I would have tried the accommodation process had I thought there were any accommodations that could have helped me. And in fact, my condition got so bad so quickly that I needed to be out of that environment as quickly as possible. So another big thing that's important is to make sure your therapist and or psychiatrist are supportive, and documents that support in the medical records. Um, the support of your medical professionals is critical to getting the claim approved. If any one medical professional that you see thinks you can go back to work, the insurance company will use that to deny you and kind of ignore all of your other doctors. So it's really important that you just have the direct conversation with them. A lot of people tell me they never have to because the therapist or the psychiatrist is the one who tells them to go off of work, so it never has to come up. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes it's the person saying, "Hey, I can't keep doing this anymore. I need your support with this insurance company." And for the most of the time, my clients report that it's an easy conversation. Their medical professionals are usually on board and even relieved. Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes a doctor will say, "I don't agree. I think you should keep working," or "I don't think that being off work will be good for you." The unfortunate reality is that it's very rare to get a doctor to change their mind once they're in a not supportive posture, and that's okay. It's understandable that different doctors have different opinions, but what you have a much better gauge of whether or not you should be working than your doctor does, than anyone else does. And if you say you're not in a position to work and your doctor says you should, my honest advice, and this is not medical advice because I can't give medical advice, but if you want to get your disability claim, I would strongly recommend finding a more supportive medical professional. And of course, this is also not medical advice, but for the most part, when you have a doctor that believes you and supports what you're saying, I think your treatment ends up being better as well. I feel like it's much harder to get the real, complete care from a doctor who's skeptical of you. And again, that's my non-medical opinion. Um, Another issue I see a lot is what I call the superhero complex, is that people have a tendency. It's hard to admit how bad what you're going through is sometimes. Sometimes you downplay it, sometimes you minimize it. I know there are things that are embarrassing to admit to your therapist or psychiatrist, especially if you've seen them for a long time and you want them to respect you, or you're worried about how they'll react, or even worried that they might take a step to do something against your will in extreme situations, which I know is very rare. I know it can be scary. It is really important to be honest with your medical professionals, because if you're not honest with them, there's not going to be support for the claim behind what you're saying. And so everything you tell them is important, and make sure you tell them everything. Again, that's not medical advice because I can't give medical advice. That's claim advice, because if the support isn't in the records, even if your doctor says later, "Yes, I support this disability claim," the insurance company will have an argument, or at least a window, that their doctor is just being supportive after the fact. If you were really disabled, they would have documented that at those visits. And one thing to kind of say is that with these claims, all these insurance companies need is one argument or one window to go from their argument looks completely ridiculous to, "Oh, maybe there's something there." Because for the most part, their positions are pretty ridiculous, because they have to, from 3,000 miles away in an office, disagree with everything your doctors are saying and everything you're saying about your condition. Um, so I'm just taking a look at the questions. So this is a really good question from Amanda that I can answer right this moment. What do I suggest when someone does not have a relationship with a mental health professional? Would they be required to establish a relationship before filing or during the claim process? I absolutely would recommend establishing that relationship if you can before filing. Um, Mostly so you can make sure that when you do file, you have support for the claim. Um, if you're already off work and you had it, you all of a sudden are in a situation where you can't work and you don't have a mental health professional, find one and then explain it. And then, you can have the mental health professional say, "This is what was happening. I didn't see them until this date, but I do believe that they're impaired going back to before." But I absolutely would suggest establishing that relationship as soon as you can. when you do establish a relationship, I caution against hopping in saying, hey, I need a mental health professional to support my disability claim. Say, hey, I'm unable to work because of these issues. I need to be treating with someone, and explain your disability claim issues along with everything else. I know that some doctors can be put off by thinking that you're just there for that kind of support. I also know that it's much better to get support for a claim after you've seen a mental health professional a few times. It's much more compelling to have a few visits under your belt and then have them approve the claim, rather than them only seeing you once and then signing off, because the insurance company can make a better argument that they're basically just being paid to sign the boxes, which is one of the arguments that they like to make. Um, so let me see. Another slide saying the same thing. So the practical reality for short-term disability and long-term disability. Most of these claims are governed by a federal law called ERISA. ERISA is evil. It's evil because what it does is it makes insurance companies far more eager to deny claims, because it removes the punishment for them doing so in bad faith. Um, for example, in a state like California, where our main office is, if you deny a claim for $100,000 and you do it in bad faith and it's not governed by ERISA, you could maybe get $1 million or $2 million jury award. And what that means is insurance companies operating outside of ERISA, they're really careful not to act badly, because it could cost them 20 times more. In every disability case governed by ERISA, the right to those bad faith remedies is preempted and it's strict. So all you're allowed to sue an insurance company for, if they deny your claim, are the benefits they owe you. My father always likes to compare this as basically saying, if the only punishment for robbing a bank was if you got caught, you had to pay the money back, wouldn't we have a lot more bank robbers? Like, why not give it a shot? Rob a bank. If you get caught, you get caught. The worst thing that happens is you have to pay the money back. That's the setup that is created for all ERISA governed health, life, and disability claims. It's one of the kind of secret reasons why health insurance in America is so unbelievably corrupt, because a lot of the insurance companies are not worried about the consequences of their actions. They're not subject to bad faith remedies. So UCLA and other government entities, and as well as religious entities, are exempt from ERISA. So if you get your coverage through your employer, it's governed by ERISA. If your employer is a government entity or a religious entity, it is not ERISA. If you're not sure, you can ask your employer. So as I kind of said, the whole process for SCD and LTD is you can imagine health insurance. What everyone commonly understands, the difficulty in getting anything related to health insurance paid. If it's anywhere outside of the obvious box, it's much worse in the disability insurance context. They are much more aggressive as far as denying claims, because there really aren't specific guidelines as to what claims need to be paid and not. It's all subjective from their perspective. So they're very aggressive, and there are a lot of reasons that these insurance companies try to justify reasons to deny. So, health claims specifically, there are some really big obstacles to getting claims paid, which I see a lot, which you should all know about if you're ever considering filing one of the claims. So the first thing, and these are kind of out of order, but the first thing is a lack of psychiatric medication. What insurance companies will basically argue is that it's not bad enough for medication, it's not bad enough to stop you from working. I know enough to know that's a stupid argument, but I also know enough to know it's not so stupid as to not trick a federal judge into thinking it's not a stupid argument. So, compelling from an insurance company, by default, if you only don't take medication because it'll appear as if your condition never got bad enough to recommend it. If your situation is that there are specific reasons why you're not on medication, whether it's religious reasons, whether you've tried medication and it hasn't worked, whether you have physical illnesses which prevent you from taking psychiatric medication, there's a lot of reasonable explanations. If that's your situation, you have to explain that. That will be an obvious hurdle that they'll create if you don't explain it. And so you'll have to, your doctor will have to explain why, they aren't recommending psychiatric medication at this time, and why you're still disabled, basically. The next thing is that the lack of a psychiatrist can often be a pretty big obstacle. I know a lot of people get psychiatric care from their primary care providers, and as well as psychiatric medication. Insurance companies like to use a similar kind of argument, basically saying, well, if it wasn't, why are we to think of it? Again, I know that argument's not a very reasonable one, but again, it's reasonable enough that they could potentially convince a judge that it's reasonable. There's a lot of reasons why people go to their primary care physician, and why, and if this treatment you're getting from your primary care doctor is working, and a lot of people can't afford a psychiatrist, can't access one. There's a lot of reasons. But if you don't see one, it is really important to make sure you explain why, and also you may have to put the onus on your either therapist or primary care doctor to do more explaining of why your psychiatric issues are disabling you. Um, so another thing that often comes up is a lack of a suggestion of higher levels of care, like intensive outpatient or even inpatient care. Now, I'll say right off the bat, if you go inpatient, there's no insurance company that's going to deny your claim. If your issues are bad enough that you need to go to an inpatient facility, they're not going to say you could have worked from the inpatient facility. That's just kind of a no-brainer, thankfully. You don't even need to be in intensive outpatient to qualify for disability benefits. But one argument an insurance company will often pose is that if no doctor, or if nobody ever suggested it or put it out there as a possibility, again, maybe maybe your condition's not bad enough to justify disability from their perspective. What I often see, I think is very common, is exactly what I just said, the suggestion of it. Basically saying, look, let's try this, this, and this, but we have to agree that if if these things don't work, or at some point you become a greater danger to yourself or others, you have to escalate your care. And many people resist, will do everything they can to fix the issue that they can fix before going to higher levels of care. It's expensive, it's scary, and it's not guaranteed to work. So it's completely understandable from my perspective why people who are really suffering don't just jump into higher levels of care, but it is something insurance companies love to harp on. It's important again to have your doctors and you explain that and say, look, yeah, we definitely we're considering higher levels of care. These are the reasons we didn't necessarily want to jump into it, and these are the steps we took instead. And often having your psychiatrist explain that they were monitoring you and ready to make that step if necessary can really be helpful. The other main, oops, go back. The other main thing that often comes up and this comes up in lots of different contexts, is accusations of inconsistent behavior, which is basically them surveilling you in one form or another. Back in the day, they used to put people in vans, have black tinted windows in the back, and have someone literally videotape you. They still do this. They spend a lot more energy on social media and social media background checks, checking everything you do online. And they'll check for anything that they can argue is inconsistent with your stated disability. And that will really depend on what your stated disability is. There are conditions where ups and downs, good days, bad days, highs and lows are part of the condition. So, if they see you on a good day operating perfectly, they might say, well, look, we saw you on a good day operating perfectly, so you should be able to work. What you have to be able to explain, and hopefully you've explained earlier, is that some days you have good days, some days you have bad days, and the fact that you can't ever predict when a good day or bad day is going to come makes you unreliable, and so not actually hireable. Inconsistencies that aren't explainable can be one of those things that can really destroy a claim. And not a lot of things can destroy a claim. There's a lot of subjectivity in these things. But if they catch you doing something truly inconsistent, that's one of the biggest threats you have. And I say this not to scare you, but to make sure you understand the importance of telling the truth when they ask you these questions. So one example that comes to mind is that there was a claimant who had a really severe anxiety disorder and was unable to do his high stress job, but basically kept his arguably high stress public speaking job on the side. And the insurance company went nuts on that and basically said, well, if you're doing public speaking, why aren't you able to do your other job? But because he had explained it to his doctors, his psychiatrists, and explained why his job and his requirements under his job were stressful, and why this side gig public speaking wasn't, because he liked being around people. He just he couldn't handle being held to certain deadlines and he'd break down. That was one of the big reasons we were allowed to kind of keep that claim going without having to explain anything else. If he had hidden that and they had found out about it, it would have been a much different story. So it's important to make sure you're consistent and honest when you're explaining what you're going through, especially to your doctors. Um, so Ralph, regarding inconsistency, is borderline personality disorder a reason to deny claims? Um, so borderline personality disorder is definitely a condition that could qualify you for benefits if it's disabling you from work. Um, there there are the inconsistencies that are inherent in that condition would actually be one of the least likely things that would cause a denial, because from my understanding the inconsistencies within borderline personality disorder are so fundamental to the disorder that you'd say, yeah, I'm inconsistent, that's the whole point. It would almost be like them pointing out a bipolar disorder. So that's actually a really interesting example, because I think that's a low risk kind of situation, where if you said if you had said you suffered from chronic depression, and they saw you out going to a concert for a couple hours in a night, they could really make hay with that. Now you could just have gotten yourself out and gone to a concert, but from their perspective, if you're too disabled to work, it would raise questions as to why you're not too disabled to go to a concert for a few hours. So those are the things that you got to kind of look at. Um, So if you have one of these claims and you are denied, there's a few things you can do to try and protect yourself. The first thing you do is request a copy of your claim file. You put it in writing, and these insurance companies should have a file which has everything that they've done in order to deny your claim, everything you've submitted, and they should send it to you within 30 days. If you are considering hiring a lawyer or have someone help you, having the claim file is one of the best ways to get the help, because they can look at everything that's happened. Um, in these denial letters, they will usually give you a deadline to appeal. One of the worst things about ERISA is that if your claim is governed by ERISA and you miss that deadline, you lose your right to sue them in court. You completely lose your rights. There's no way around it. It's one of the worst laws I've ever even heard of, but it's incredibly important to appeal before that denial letter, the deadline of the denial letter. And if you're getting close to that date, what you should do is just ask for more time to appeal. If you are denied, I strongly recommend a free consultation with an LTD lawyer, long-term disability lawyer. A lot of us give free consultations. There's never a reason to pay any lawyer any money, in my opinion, for a consultation unless they're going to give you something in return, like evaluate a contract or something like that. When you're denied a claim and they're going to take your case on potentially, you shouldn't have to pay anybody for a consultation. I know most of my colleagues give free consultations. Um, I practice in Washington. I'm actually getting barred there right now. There's also a great lawyer in Washington named Jeremy Bordelon, and I'll share that information after. I should have put it in the slide. But just like doctors, it's always good to get more than one opinion. Test out a few doctors, test out a few lawyers. There's lots of good ones out there. So definitely feel like contacting one if you want. And that's all I've got in 43 minutes. Good. I was trying to get it in under time. And that's my presentation. So thank you all for your time. Let me take a look at these questions on the side. So Donna had a question, and Donna, you can ask your questions about HB 1432, and I'll admit I'll do the best I can. I can almost promise you HB 1432 has nothing to do with disability insurance. It is only applicable to health insurance. I don't see how it could apply to disability insurance. If you have any other questions about it, I'm happy to try to answer them. It's a little outside of my area, but I'm always up for a challenge.
We have a new commissioner of state insurance, Patty Cooterer. I was wondering if you're doing any work with the office of the insurance commissioner, since their attitude and their policies will be more, I think, more supportive of policyholders as opposed to insurers.
So not directly anymore. We had a big relationship with the insurance commissioners from a few years ago when we were trying to change the way these policies were reviewed in court. And a lot of lawyers like us were interacting with their state insurance commissioners to try and help push these laws through. Some of them are successful and some of them weren't. It was a massive effort that was to some degree not deflating because it was successful, but I think a lot of us ran out of steam after that. And it was, the older generation, like my parents, were the ones kind of spearheading the effort. And I've kind of noticed that generation is the generation retiring out a little bit. And so our ranks as a profession, in our niche, are a little bit thinned out because a lot of the older lawyers who really started this kind of work and spearheaded a lot of the activism when ERISA first started are starting to retire and, be grandparents and have fun with their lives. So not yet. I'd be more than interested to try and connect with some of these offices. I don't mean to get political. My level of skepticism about government right now is extremely high. So I would love to see what any government could do to help us all. I mean, it's great to hear that this commissioner is moving in the right direction.
Well,
Um,
and the other point I just want to make is that we're very active in public policy advocacy. So if there are specific issues or items that you think NAMI should be advocating on to change insurance laws or regulations, please let us know because we want to advocate to make it easier for people to get coverage.
Well, I think the big obvious thing that comes to mind would, if there was a law that would ban 2-year mental health limitations in policies, that would be extraordinary. And I'll tell you, the way it usually ends up impacting people is when we litigate these cases, 95% of them end up in a lump sum settlement. And people have to gauge the amount of benefits they have going forward with the amount of time they'll be at work. But basically, when there's only 2 years of benefits, people who could be disabled for many years only have 2 years to fight for. And we don't have the leverage to threaten the way we do in any other case that, hey, this person could be disabled till 67. You really should compensate them for what you've put them through. And frankly, the rate at which mental health disabilities can be disabling and the way they can impact people, you know, anybody, I think it would be something that would really go a long way. I mean, the number of people who have been just left high and dry after 2 years because they're not ready to go back to work and there's no way around the provision. It's like completely heartbreaking. So that's definitely what I would say.
All right, I will send my email to you. I'm sure that Edie has your email, and your email is posted. I'm public policy chair for our affiliate, and I'm also a lawyer, and
No.
so I'm very interested in drafting legislation.
Oh wow, that would be amazing. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Great, great. Yeah, no, we should definitely talk. Um, what is a dependent? Can it be an unrelated adult? I assume you're asking for Social Security purposes. The rule for Social
Correct.
Security is that they will give you the 50% if you claim that person as a tax dependent. So if they qualify as a tax dependent, then I believe they'll qualify as a Social Security dependent. I think they're intertwined. But you'd have to look at that up specifically. Or ask me later and I can help you look it up because I don't know right this second. Um, I do believe a recording of this meeting is going to be available for later.
Yes, I can answer
Yeah.
that. Yes, there will be a recording available later. I'm gonna send it out. We're gonna upload it to our YouTube channel, and then we're also gonna let Kantor and Kantor will be able to upload it to their YouTube channel as well. And I'll be sending a link to the recording to everyone who registered for this meeting. So even if someone registered and weren't able to show up at the last second, you will be getting a link to the recording at the very latest midday tomorrow. So yes.
Great.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I did the dependent thing. I'll send you an email later and I'll ask about that dependent thing.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Anyone else have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat or any hands up.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, Donna's already familiar with this topic as I've discussed it with her, but at the end of last year, I applied for life insurance policy with Pacific Life. and I was denied just on the basis of a mental health diagnosis. Um, and the agent gave me a chance to write an appeal. You
Mm.
mentioned appeals, and I wrote an appeal letter. I spent a lot of time on it and submitted it, and basically got denied a second time for the
Yeah.
same reason without really much explanation. So I didn't contact the insurance commissioner. This was at the end of last year, but I heard you say that you sometimes sue big insurance companies, but I'm just wondering, is there any kind of remedy for me? I could, or is it too late to file with the insurance commissioner?
No, so unfortunately, there really is no remedy because insurance companies are allowed to deny coverage for basically any reason. If they don't want to take your money and give in, exchange for coverage, they're allowed to do that. And there's really no law or no way to enforce that. The recommendation we give everyone, and this happens a lot, is I would talk to a broker, ask them to see if there's other life insurance companies who will insure you, especially ask if there are some that will potentially include that include provisions that would accommodate their concerns. Usually, there are other life insurance companies that will insure you, even if one won't. But there's no way really to do anything about that if they don't want to give you insurance, unfortunately. Yeah, that's another reason that group life insurance through your employer is can be a really good thing if you're employed because they have to give you life insurance regardless of underwriting. Um, so they'll just if you have a job and they offer life insurance, they'll just give it to you. So it's one of the
Okay,
few
thank
upsides.
you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions before we call tonight? Cool.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. As I said, I love to hear myself talk. I got to do it for 50 minutes straight, and no judge to answer to, and no parents telling me to stop talking. It was really awesome. No, I really do appreciate you giving me this platform. I I really enjoy doing this. It's a really good way to use my energy, and I like putting a little bit of good juju into the world whenever I get a chance. And I'd much rather be doing this than other real legal work. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. I know everybody here is probably going to benefit from some piece of information here tonight, and so yeah, I thank you so much for being here. And like I said, the recording will be going out to everyone by midday tomorrow at the latest. You've got a little contact us page up there. So you've got the website and email, and I'll include your email as well. I'll include all of this information so people can take a look at it in my email I send to the registrants as well. The one thing I did want to say before I forget, Andrew, you said there was another lawyer that people could maybe also contact if they needed a long-term disability lawyer in the state of Washington too. So I thought maybe if you wanted to drop their name.
Just put his name in the
Perfect.
chat. Yeah, Jeremy Ward.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Then I'll make sure to include his name in my email to everyone as well. But yeah, other than that, I think this was really awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight on this lovely Tuesday evening. This has been the Evergreen Health Forum, hosted by NAMI Eastside, sponsored by Evergreen Health, tonight featuring Kantor and Kantor. And yeah, if you have any questions at all, you can also feel free to email me. You'll get an email from me tomorrow, but I will drop my email in the chat as well. Oh, it's not.
For those on the east side, who 20 years ago was the founding of Hero House because of NAMI East Side, and this Saturday is a block party. It's open to the public out in Bellevue. You can contact Hero House and join us if you will, if you can.
Hey, that's awesome. Thank you so much for letting us know about that, Ralph.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll try and I'll find the info for that, and I can maybe include that in my email to everyone as well.
I can forward that to you, Edie.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you
Bye.
all. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.